Room 301, 302, and 303 are locked. Room 301, 302, and 306 are locked.
This used to be 302. AP World, AP US, and US 311. Years ago. 23rd.
This one was good. Yeah, right? Okay. My ear was open. 30, what is that number, 301?
Ms. Cocker, 303 is Ms.
Oh, 306 is locked also?
Over right here.
Over in here? Okay, I'm gonna call no. 30, you and 306.
Oh, God, debate time.
302 and 306 are locked. Okay, I'm calling Mr. Harani now. Oh, okay, and 306. Okay, thank you. Yippee.
Now then.
This room is set up correctly for debate, right?
Yes, well, kind of, that's like, well, they're debating the plans. Oh, I have cough drops, I forgot, I forgot to tell you guys in case there is a tickle, not during it, but like after. Hello, hi.
Look. It's on the last 12.
Good morning, and hi, guys. I was gonna close the door. Do you guys want the air on or off? Are you comfortable?
I think on would be nice.
Huh?
I think on would be nice.
Me too, can you tell?
Yeah.
Okay, are you ready?
Yes.
Good shape, you're okay? All right. Ready? Who's calling what? Tails. So making sure that's right. I'm not good at this. Okay. They said this was a word. So I'm just gonna share this with the other side, looks like it might be two heads. No, that's tails, so this is heads. So who called heads? You wanna do what? Pro? Give me a second.
Or we would like to go second. We'd like to go second.
You'd like to go second? Do you want the lights on?
The lights are on.
Do you want those on? Does it matter?
No.
Okay, all right.
Judges ready?
Judges, by Jackie.
Judge ready?
Yes.
The topic for our debate is on balance, non-governmental organizations and NGOs are more effective than governments and improving lives with different needs. We do affirmative team believe that this statement is true. Before we start, we would like to say our definition. Cambridge Dictionary defines disadvantage as, quote, a condition or a situation that causes problems, especially one that causes something or someone to be less successful than other things or people, and improve as to cause something to get better. Lastly, I would like to define NGO as, quote, a nonprofit organization that operates independently from any government, typically one that addresses a social or political issue. Today, as your first speaker, I'll be talking to you about how NGOs help solve long-term issues, help with basic needs such as lighting or water, and how they are able to help with focus on children and bettering their lives at a young age. My first point is how NGOs help solve long-term issues such as child marriage and education. CARE is an NGO that focuses on many things, but one of their main focuses is on child brides. Even though the governments are taking steps to prevent child brides, it still happens. According to CARE, nearly 39,000 girls become a child bride each day. These girls aren't often able to finish their education, are at a higher risk of being physically abused, contracting HIV and other diseases, and dying while being pregnant or giving birth. Another NGO is Room to Read. Room to Read focuses on giving girls an education. They teach kids how to read and write, and lastly, they train teachers. They work in 10 different developing countries, helping these students better their lives later on. My second point is how NGOs help with basic needs such as lighting and water in developing countries. Barefoot College supplies safe, reliable energy and clean water. They also train solar engineers in Africa to continue having an effect on the country even after they have left. Another example of an NGO that brings safe, clean water is Generosity.org. They focus on bringing clean water to countries such as Uganda, when the governments aren't able to. After they've brought clean water to a village, they set up committees to make sure that they can continue to have clean water even after they've left. Lastly, there's Solar Aid. Solar Aid focuses on bringing affordable, clean, and bring safe, clean, affordable lighting to countries in Africa. According to Solar Aid, 598 million people in Africa don't have access to electricity. These people turn to expensive and dangerous alternatives such as homemade kerosene. My third point is how NGOs are able to focus on children. Cry or Child Rights to You is an Indian NGO that focus on education, healthcare, and protecting children from going into child labor. Another NGO that focuses on children is GFC, or Global Funds for Children. They focus on education, gender equity, youth empowerment, and help with children in violent situations. They also focus on giving girls who were put into sex trafficking an education. In conclusion, NGOs are more effective in governments and improving lives of disadvantaged people, since they are able to help solve long-term issues, help with basic needs such as water and lighting, and how they are able to start with children and improving their lives at a young age.
We can do 30 seconds.
Yes. What did you say?
Yes, 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Thank you. Judge ready? Thomas Jefferson once said, "Government exists for the interests of the governed, not for the governments." Good morning, Honorable Judge and esteemed opponents. Today, we are the negative, and we firmly believe that the resolution presented is untrue. We agree with the definitions provided by the pro, and hence would like to move on. Firstly, throughout their examples, they have not given us any sources for all the information shared with us, leading the con to question whether these data come from reliable sources and whether or not this truly stands. Furthermore, we have not been given any success rates, so we have no idea how many disadvantaged people are being helped by the NGOs mentioned, and also do not have any idea of out of the large numbers that they have quoted, how many are truly being able to bring about sustainable change in their life. We would now like to move on to our first claim, which is that in many cases, governments and NGOs need to work together to create a viable solution. To prove this claim, we have an example in the health sector where governments and NGOs worked together to eradicate polio in India and also beyond, having almost eradicated polio in the entire world. Many people believe that the polio eradication initiative in India was taken up by Rotary International. However, in reality, without government funding and reach, the door-to-door campaign initiative would have been absolutely impossible. Polio is a disease that attacks the spinal cord, leading people to be disabled for the rest of their lives once they've contracted the disease. And since it's a viral disease, it has no cure apart from prevention vaccinations. The vaccines were initially promoted by the government, and this helped people have less resistance to the vaccines as they trusted the government was taking care to make sure that the vaccines provided were in the best condition possible. The polio-free certification of India was provided in 2014 by WHO, and the involvement of the Indian government is corroborated by Rotary International, CBS News, WHO, UNICEF, and the UN as a whole. To quote the American Academy of Pediatrics, I quote, "Government ownership of the initiative at all levels of governance, absolute accountability, meticulous microplanning, and real-time monitoring and review of the ongoing program were the main reasons behind India's success against polio." End quote. There were 2 nationwide polio vaccination campaign days in India every year, and on a single day, there were 172 million children in more than 225 million households vaccinated by nearly 2.3 million vaccinators, according to a WHO article released in early 2013. The program involved the local religious leaders and institutions to solicit support and engagement of all sections of society, and implemented a special plan for 107 high-risk blocks of UP and Bihar to provide a complete package of health and sanitation services in addition to improving the vaccination coverage, as poor sanitation in these areas reduced the efficiency of the oral vaccination. According to polioeradication.org, which is the official website of the polio eradication movement globally, it was a challenge. After all, India constituted over 60% of all global polio cases as recently as 2009. However, in 2014, India was officially declared polio-free, along with the rest of the Southeast Asia region. Thanks to the singular commitment of the Indian government at all levels, partners of the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, notably WHO, Rotary International, and UNICEF, polio was tackled head-on. India has not had a single case of wild polio virus since 2011. And this shows to prove the direct involvement of governments in any initiative truly helps create the best results, especially when they work together with NGOs.
You mentioned how, so you mentioned how governments are working with NGOs. What you say that shows that governments also believe that NGOs can help more people since they are putting in their money and their resources to help these NGOs.
No, the thing is that these NGOs actually approached the government to ask for help because they knew that they could not do it without the help of the government. Because NGOs simply do not have the resources to reach every single child in a country as large as India, which has a population of 1.3 billion people. Affecting that many lives is something that is simply not possible by a single NGO alone, which is why we believe that NGOs and governments working together create the best results. That's the game of the resolution. So we would like success rates about approximately how many child brides were helped by the NGOs you mentioned in the first place.
Yes, of course. So as I said, there are nearly 39,000 girls being married each day, and in Malawi, they've helped 45% of these girls get out of their child marriages, which the government hasn't taken any steps to help these girls get out of their situation that they were into. You mentioned UNICEF and the UN. Would you say that these are NGOs?
So intergovernmental organizations are in a sense also governments because a government is a group of people who has authority over any piece of land. The UN does have a certain amount of authority over every piece of land or every country that has joined the UN because they have signed a certain charter that says that they will follow the laws of the UN, showing that UN does have a certain amount of mandate over every country in the world. And since an intergovernmental organization is comprised basically of government representatives, that shows that it is the governments who are coming together to take initiatives through an intergovernmental organization. We would like to know how many people were aided out of the 598 million people who lack electricity in Africa, and what are the sources with the credibility, etc.
Okay. So basically, these people that they help in the solar.
Yes.
Okay. So the people that they help in Africa, they focus on villages at a time, and they've helped, I believe, 119 villages. And I got my information through Solar because it's a very trustworthy NGO that many people know. They would have caught any, if they would have lied about their numbers, it would be right away known, and they are held accountable for their numbers, and it's a very trustworthy NGO. I've also read it on different sources, even though I don't.
Today, as a second speaker, I'll be discussing how NGOs are more effective at improving the lives of disadvantaged people. I'll be looking into the Red Cross, how NGOs are cheaper to implement, and water aid in India. Firstly, the American Red Cross, which shelters, feeds, and provides emotional support to victims of disasters, supplies about 40% of the nation's budget, teaches skills that save lives, provides international humanitarian aid, and supports military members and their families. The Red Cross is a not-for-profit organization that depends on volunteers and the generosity of the American public to perform its mission. Helpline delivers humanitarian relief to refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers around the world, provides humanitarian aid to migrants in a number of ways such as responding to requests for cots, blankets, hygiene items, and other support from organizations assisting migrant families on the southwest border. As its organizations have become increasingly strained by the surge of people in need, we are increasing this vital assistance. During natural disasters or emergencies, the Red Cross does not turn people away who need help. People who have disaster-related needs are not required to be American citizens in order to access Red Cross services. That means that when hurricanes, wildfires, or floods strike, they offer help regardless of immigration status. That includes access to assistance such as emergency shelter, food, first aid, cleanup kits, and comfort. Each year, the American Red Cross responds to more than 70,000 disasters nationwide. Second of all, NGOs are cheaper to implement. NGOs are actual non-profit organizations. Various projects can be achieved without having to use government money. This is because there are many private donors who support the NGOs, and this means that there will never be a lack of resources. NGOs provide a good alternative to creating mass access structures. These mass access structures are extremely cumbersome, unreliable, and costly. Along with that, NGOs are able to improve one's life, since NGOs are more beneficial than government programs because they are usually community-based organizations. The research, develop, and work on several projects which can help people change their lives. Along with that, NGOs are able to penetrate all corners of the community to find out what kind of problems people face and what they can do to make things better. NGOs are flexible in becoming accustomed to local conditions and responding to local needs. For that reason, they can experiment freely with new approaches and take risks if necessary. They can develop integrated projects to help people. NGOs have better communications since they have the capability of communicating at all levels. This means that they can easily interact with the local people and relay their messages to top levels. They are also capable of recruiting highly motivated staff and experts with lesser restrictions than employees working for the government. Lastly, looking into WaterAid India, which is a part of the Global WaterAid Network, which seeks to improve access to clean water, decent toilets, and good hygiene for everyone everywhere. They have started in 1986 with a determination to make clean water, decent toilets, and good hygiene normal for everyone, everywhere within a generation. Only by tackling these three essentials in ways that last, so people can change their lives for good in India. In India, WaterAid works with communities in rural and urban areas through partners. Thanks to their amazing supporters, they have reached millions of people with these three essentials: clean water, decent toilets, and good hygiene, enabling communities to unlock their potential to break free from the cycle of poverty and to change lives for good. They have also focused on women menstrual issues. Since earlier, many women in India used to get infections because of the improper usage of dirty cloth. Now, due to WaterAid India, the silence is being broken, and women are learning how to maintain hygiene during these days, resulting in fewer such health issues. Millions of people in India lack access to clean drinking water, affecting livelihood, health, and resources. Water filters turn out to be an expensive option for many in urban. The community was not very clean in those days, and hence the incidence of diseases like malaria were high, resulting in an inability to attend school and a risk of high diseases. The results of WaterAid India have helped people obtain clean water, decent toilets, and good hygiene, which help them go to schools and be in good health condition. In conclusion, non-government organizations are more effective than governments since they're able to focus on making things such as clean water and basic healthcare more available. Thank you.
Honorable Judge, the Pro has given us many examples of NGOs helping the disadvantaged people, but they've not given us a single number of disadvantaged people who have actually been helped. Without having success rates, how do we know that any of their NGOs have actually been able to help? They've not shown us how governments are inefficient in doing so, which is the resolution they have the burden to prove. They've talked about how people don't have electricity and they have been helped, and 190 villages have been helped, and they've used the official website. We're not saying that the official website will fabricate the evidence, but how are we supposed to know that they're talking on completely truthful statuses? We need corroborating sources. Without corroborating sources, we don't know if the success is actually identified as a big movement. They've talked about 119 villages being helped, but they've not told us the number of people in those villages. We don't know if their life rates have actually improved, if they've actually been able to use this clean water. They've talked about how Red Cross gives WaterAid, gives emotional support, and that each year they're giving 70,000 nationwide responses, but just giving responses does not show how good they are. We do not know how many disadvantaged people have been helped, and we do not even know if they are better than governments in doing so. They've talked about WaterAid in India, which had started in 1986, and then millions of people have been reached and have been able to break free from poverty. But as of the poverty index, there's still 364 million people living in poverty. So how does this actually show that NGOs are better than governments and improving the lives of disadvantaged people? They talk about malaria risks being high and how water aid is actually helping, but isn't it the US government that has given the highest funding to help disadvantaged people going through malaria, as given by WHO reports? We would like to move on to our second claim, which is that NGOs and governments working together through intergovernmental organizations like the United Nations are better than NGOs alone. As given by a Guardian article by Sam Jones and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is a very prestigious NGO, according to its figures, UNICEF has helped provide nearly 2 billion people with water, immunized 40% of the world's children, helping to save 3 million lives a year, and has helped reduce the number of deaths of children under 5 by 50% since 1990. This is all done in the poorest countries where there are the most number of disadvantaged people being held. In 2014, it responded to 300 emergencies in 90 countries, including the aftermath of Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines and continuing conflicts in Syria, Iraq, and the Central African Republic, the intensification of civil war in South Sudan, and the Ebola crisis in parts of West Africa. Substantial progress has been made towards achieving Millennium Development Goal 4. Globally, the number of deaths under 5 has declined from nearly 2 million in 12 million in 1990 to 6.9 million in 2012. This means that 14,000 fewer disadvantaged children are dying every day. The drought crisis in the Sahel was one of the biggest challenges. More than 18 million people face food insecurity, and estimated 1.1 million children were in danger of death. And in some countries, food insecurity was exacerbated by conflict and displacement and cholera. By the end of September, UNICEF has reached more than 730,000 severely malnourished children under 5 with life-saving treatment. Through examples, we're trying to show that NGOs alone just don't have the resources or manpower to do as much as they could do with governments together, hence proving the resolution on balance, NGOs are more effective than governments and proving the lives of disadvantaged people untrue. We would ask the Pro to give us substantial evidence showing that these NGOs have actually been able to help, and also to prove that governments are actually inefficient in doing so. Thank you. No. Yeah.
Wouldn't you say that India has the money to help their people, whereas places most NGOs work don't have the funds?
Actually, no, as India is a developing country and has a very low per capita index as compared to all the countries in the world. They're at 126 out of 195. Hence, and is still not considered a developed nation. So, through our claims of proving that NGOs and governments need to work together to be able to help disadvantaged people, since NGOs alone don't have the resources. You talked about how their Water Aid India is helping millions of people break free from poverty, but do you acknowledge the fact that India still has 364 million people living in poverty, multidimensional poverty?
Well, Water Aid India is picking up the stuff that the government isn't doing, and it's helping the people of India. Do you have any sources showing that the UN is a government?
We are not considering the UN a government. We're saying that it's an intergovernmental organization, and we're simply saying that governments and NGOs working together through intergovernmental organizations are better than NGOs alone, since intergovernmental organizations work from the manpower, resources, and funding given by NGOs and governments. You talked about 119 villages being helped, but do you have any number or statistics showing the actual amount of people in that village, and if they've actually been, till date, able to use clean water?
My partner will be touching up on that during his summary. Doesn't it show that the government's donating the money to NGOs? They believe that NGOs can help their countries or other places more?
No, governments are giving resources, manpower, their own people to help, as we showed in the polio eradication movement. And we're showing that NGOs alone don't have the resource, and they need to work together to be able to have viable outcomes. Hence, proving that NGOs alone are not more efficient, since they do need government funding, resources, and manpower to be able to help a considerable amount of disadvantaged people.
You talked about how Welfare College provides water, trains engineers, but you've not given us any sources saying that they've been able to be better than governments. Are they better than governments? Are they more efficient than governments at helping these engineers or these people in Africa?
My partner will also be touching on that. Wouldn't you say that governments donating their money shows that they believe that they help more? That NGOs help more?
No, governments are giving this money, government is giving manpower. They're simply stating that NGOs and governments need to work together since there's so many disadvantaged people in the world. And government has a lot more to do than just help. And NGOs themselves don't have enough income or manpower to be able to help 1.32 billion people, hence showing that they need to work together to be able to help a considerable amount of disadvantaged people. You talked about 39,000 women being married every day, and that in Malawi, 45% of these girls were helped.
No, you can continue.
45% of these girls were helped, but could you give us the number of girls who are actually being married in Malawi and a source for this statistic?
My partner will give you the statistics also.
I'm not ready. Ready? You ready now? Time ready? Okay, I first would, wait, sorry. Okay, now, judge ready? Time ready? Everyone's ready?
Yes.
Okay. So I first would like to talk about Barefoot College. I believe that's what they meant when they said welfare college.
Yes.
It's called Barefoot College, and it helps. They have given lighting to 1 million people around. They reached, 2 million people around the world in 96 countries. And in Africa, where the governments are unable to help, they have trained 560 solar engineers in Africa to continue having a lasting effect. First of all, another thing I would like to say is how Solar Aid. They talked about how Solar Aid was providing clean water. No, they were providing lighting, where the people in Africa had black toxic kerosene lamps, which affected their health. They weren't able to study as much, and etc. They have helped 119 villages in Africa. I'm not sure how many people were in these villages, but most people in Africa live in the outskirts of places. Another thing I'd like to state is how they've only talked about how NGOs and governments work together. Surely, if governments work together with NGOs, it shows that governments believe that NGOs have more of an effect on their countries or different countries because they are donating their money to these NGOs. NGOs also can earn more money during times of crises, where governments only have their set fund. NGOs can gain money from different donors, etc. And if governments are donating their money to these NGOs, they believe that these NGOs help truly more than the government themselves do. Thank you.
We have 30 seconds to discuss this something speech. Judge ready? Opponents ready? Partner ready?
Yes.
Throughout our case, the con has been trying to prove that NGOs and governments working together create the best possible result for all the parties involved. To first pay attention to the fact that they've said that governments are giving their money to the NGOs. However, this is not true in any shape or form. the governments are not only giving money, they're also the main overseers of all the projects that they're taking up with NGOs. They're providing manpower, as the government has a greater amount of manpower that is on a constant salary, and hence the people of any country would trust their government employees more than they would trust any NGO. Throughout the opponent's speeches, they have failed to provide us with any success rates showing us how many people have had a lasting or sustainable change in their life. Whereas with the examples provided by the con, we have shown how vaccination helps eradicate a debilitating disease which causes people to be disabled for the rest of their lives. The people who contract polio initially are also disadvantaged because of the fact that polio is transmitted through contaminated water, showing that poorer people who have less access to proper sanitation have a higher chance of contracting the disease, showing that they are more disadvantaged. Through the speech through the example of how NGOs provide clean water to people, they said that there were 2 million people worldwide affected. How does this compare to the 2 billion people that UNICEF has helped with the aid of 139 governments and a few big NGOs? They repeatedly say that Solar Aid has helped 119 villages with electricity, but how does this show the number of people? This sheer scope of governments and NGOs working together cannot be matched by NGOs alone, as it is impossible for any NGO to have the same reach as the government of that country. And them working together truly shows that, on balance, NGOs alone cannot work better than governments at improving the lives of disadvantaged people. Thank you.
Can we take 1 minute, please? So you said that governments have more of a constant, payment for their workers' salary. Pardon. They have a constant salary, but only this year did the U.S. government not pay their workers for 5 weeks in a row. The NGOs also have a constant salary, where governments have shown that one of the biggest countries have not paid their workers in 5 weeks. This year, doesn't that just show that governments don't give a constant salary to their workers?
First of all, we talked about the Indian government and how they've been giving money and manpower resources to the United States and to the country and to the movement, polio eradication movement. We talk about salary not being given for 5 weeks. You failed to mention if these people are actually disadvantaged, which is the resolution we are debating. We're trying to prove to you that NGOs and governments need to work together to have viable solutions, as shown by our example of polio eradication movement in India.
Basically, we don't get the relevance of that point being brought in when the government we're talking about is completely different from the one you've mentioned in your question. Our question to you is, you said that there are 2 million people being helped by Barefoot College, and if it's compared to the 2 billion people that is helped by, in the same area, may I add, by governments and NGOs working together through intergovernmental organizations, wouldn't you say that NGOs alone do not have the scope that governments and NGOs together do?
Well, First of all, I do not believe that IGOs are governments. Well, yes, they do get funding from the government. They are not a government themselves. They work with NGOs as well, and these NGOs have helped where the government has done nothing. Where you have talked about IGOs are helping from around the world. That's not their direct government. It could be money from the US or from the UK or from Denmark or some other country where it might not be money directly from the government that they're in the country that they're helping due to the IGOs usually not working in the US or in the UK where they get quite a lot of their funding. Sorry. Okay, going back to my previous question, you said how you didn't see it was relevant, but you said that governments have more of a constant salary, where it clearly you said governments with S's at the end. It clearly shows that the U.S. didn't give their workers a constant salary, which made some of them have to go to disadvantaged solutions for like the homeless, or had to leave their homes because they didn't have the money to pay for their homes anymore.
What is the question?
Okay, sorry, pardon me. So you said how governments have a constant salary, and you said that these people who didn't receive their salary for the 5 weeks when the U.S. government wasn't paying their salary weren't disadvantaged, but these people turned to disadvantaged solutions. So the government put these people into disadvantage. When you said that the government had put these people into these disadvantaged situations.
To answer this question, we believe that the US government would have had very valid reason for not paying the government workers, which means that unless we have a full background of the reasons why the people were not paid, we cannot say whether it was the government's fault or whether it was simply a part of the processes of everything moving together, which is why we do not get the exact context of this question and its relevance to the arguments proposed by the con, as we may have said that governments have a steadier salary, but what we wanted to say was that they have a steadier workforce because they have people employed. However, NGOs rely on volunteers. When there is a drop in volunteers, NGOs cannot do as much work as they could with more volunteers. However, since the government has a constant number of workers, it's easier for a government to constantly help people in any country.
So do we take the rest of the time? No.
Essentially, my partner and I have talked about the Red Cross and Water Aid India, in which they picked up the slack that governments were not able to provide in the first place. Along with that, having these situations in which the government had slack shows that when our opponents say that we need governments and NGOs to work together, this can't be true because governments have slack and NGOs are the ones who have to go ahead and pick up that slack. Along with that, governments have a set fund while NGOs are gaining. So if the government and the NGOs are working together, then it shows that the government believes that NGOs are more effective, further proving our resolution. Along with that, our opponents stated that they trust government employees rather than NGOs. Well, we have proven that since NGOs are able to penetrate all corners of the community and find out what kind of problems people face and what they can do to make things better. Along with that, our opponents only talked about NGOs and how they help, and they never actually given us any government examples. And we're talking about on-balance governance. And to provide statistics, as our opponents asked for the CRY, they have helped 364,818 children from 2017 to 2018, 10,000 children vaccinated, 13,000 protected from malnutrition, 193,000 children in school, and that's just some of it. For Barefoot College, they helped with safe, reliable energy and clean water. They helped 96 countries. They reached 2 million people. And for the Room to Read education, in Vietnam, they helped 809,000, Nepal 2.9 million, India 3.8 million, Sri Lanka 1.1 million, Bangladesh 389,000, Laos 579,000, Cambodia 1.5 million, Tanzania 656,000, and that's just some to state. Thank you.
Can we get a remaining minute?
Sources.
Judge, ready?
Yes.
Ready? Honorable Judge, the Pro has given us a lot of statistics, but they fail to mention how many of these people are actually disadvantaged. They fail to give us the number of people in those countries who actually need helping, so we don't know what percentage of disadvantaged people would really help. They talked about how governments believe that NGOs are more efficient, but it was the NGOs, in fact, that came to government for help. Since doesn't that show that NGOs themselves don't believe that they're more efficient than governments? We've shown you that NGOs and governments working together give more viable solutions. You talked about millions of people being helped, but how is that compared to the 2 billion people helped, 2 billion disadvantaged people helped by UNICEF? And this was all done by governments and NGOs working together, giving funding, etc. You talked about how one of your WaterAid and one of your NGOs gain money from different donors, but who are these donors? We don't even know. For all we know, these donors could be governments. You've talked about how there's a lasting effect that they've helped, but without any success rates, we don't even know if any of your claims stand. We could sit here and talk about the future as much as we want, but you've not given us any substantial evidence that NGOs have in fact been more efficient than governments at improving the lives of disadvantaged people. Through our cases, we've shown you that governments and NGOs working together have been able to eradicate polio in India, and India constituted 60% of polio worldwide. And through more help by governments and NGOs together, now the world is eradicated by polio by 99%, with only 3 countries left with polio. We told you how, you talked about how malaria risks were high and WaterAid was helping by giving clean, sanitary, and clean water. But we did say that donations for improvement in malaria in the medical field was given by US CDC, henceforth proving that governments are more efficient and that governments and NGOs need to work together. The Pro has not given us any substantial evidence that NGOs have been more more efficient than governments. They've not given us any success rates. Hence, we believe that as the con, we've negated the resolution and that we have won. Thank you.
Good job, guys.
That was fun. Okay. Now I'll go wade through my pages.
Ooh, we could find out the finalists soon. That's
Yeah.
a little nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Best luck, guys.
Best of luck. Thank you, Judge.
Bye. It's nice getting to see you guys in a different setting than yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
how
different,
yeah.
What are you doing? Debate? No, I'm doing oratory. Time. I believe so. Hi, Tia. Hi. Can you guys help me? Do you know how to do the timer? Yeah. Can you help me? You just start there, you stop there, you reset. Oh, so you stop here and you start there? Yeah. Well, you start, you stop, you hold for 2 seconds. Right. It resets. Right. It's different. See, it says they both do the same thing. What does your timer look like? This is my phone. Yeah, the last church that I had. Yeah, the one I used yesterday. The one I have is. Oh, do you have one? I have some movie in mind. Reset. It's not supposed to look. When we have to reset it. Are we supposed to reset that one? It's not set up how it's supposed to be. See, this is what I'm doing order, I'm supposed to use it up like this, it's set up for date right now.
So Hannah has to do 3 runners?
Yeah.
Ella es Noruego. Vive en Stavanger. Ella es Therese Ella vive ella de Stockholm y dormir a ella de que está ella de gusta mirar televisión. Ella es mi mejor amiga y la extraño. Deja que sea.
Oh, is that the one? Yeah.
It's not